Welcome to Under Wraps, a discussion of the most recent creations by Ali. We will begin today's webinar by taking the opportunity to look back to 1977, when we first encountered Ali's remarkable art. Ali first visited our gallery soon after her graduation from the museum school in Boston, when our gallery was just 10 years old, and we were housed in a sub-street level basement of 171 Newbury Street on the sunny side of the street, in a location where we remained until 2016. We were astonished by her small sewn pieces of fabric depicting circus scenes, and immediately said that we would like very much to present her art. Brother Thomas wrote, "Skill and art are not the same thing. The only real measure of art is astonishment." How perfect a description of our response to Ali's work. She had 5 or 6 small works with her, and within days, all had been spoken for by members of the staff of the gallery. Thus began then an unknown and certainly uncharted journey together. Of late, I've been exploring the notion of originality and talent. When someone creates something new and original, can it be sustained? Is talent enough to make it stretch across decades of working? Again, Thomas, the only authentic path we must follow is the one we find within. Ali has her own unique and authentic voice that continues to instigate and inspire each new work. We recognize how challenging it must be to keep in touch with her own personal optic on life and to continue to figure out how best to share it and to transmit it. These are notions we will discuss today with Ali as we uncover Under Wraps. What a joy it is to look back over more than 4 decades of Ali's work and to realize it is both authentic and fresh and captivating. She has an amazing ability to create unique works that surprise and astonish. One after another, it has been a magical ride. Throughout all these years, her art has attracted steady interest, but has been especially dear to 3 women. These women have responded consistently to her innovations and her twists and turns along a singular journey. Their commitment to Ali and her art has been a joy to behold. Clearly, each artist needs to feel seen and understood, and Ali certainly has been so accepted and appreciated by many. One of these colleagues and friends is Beth Neustadt, who will join us today to share a look back over these years of friendship and creativity. And that Ali's work is based upon the appreciation and manipulation of light and shadows to create magical spaces. I turn once again to Thomas, who said, "It is amazing how our shadows fall in places that we ourselves cannot go." The amazing thing about Ali's shadows is that they allow us to experience her magic and also magically take us to places within ourselves. We're going to share a chronological visual tour of Ali's work. Let's begin the journey and welcome. With that, I would like to ask Beth to begin sharing with us her journey into Ali land.
Well, thank you, Bernie. I was remembering that when I had already been coming to the gallery for some time as a perennial student who never could afford to buy anything, but was always made to feel welcome. I walked in one day and there were, I believe it must have been right after Ali first came, because there were a set of her paintings, circus paintings, that were leaning against a wall. And I absolutely had that same sense of astonishment. So that was my very first impression of them. There's a longer story that Bernie and Ali, I think too, have heard many times. So I won't go into all the details of it here, but essentially I had this fantasy that if I ever gave my details, my name and contact details to Bernie or Anita, who were the two people who used to welcome me and show me around, I would end up having to buy something. And since I didn't think I could afford ever to buy anything, I never gave away my information. So they would always greet me and escort me around the gallery. But at the end, as I was leaving, they would always invite me to give them information so I could go on the mailing list. And I would always run away quickly before they found out, until about a decade later, Bernie said to me, would you like to be on our mailing list? Because we're going to have a show of Ollie's work. And if I get an invitation out to you, you won't miss the show. And I've noticed that you've taken an interest in her work for a long time. So I sheepishly gave my information out. And it turned out that Bernie had been a student of my father's 20 years earlier at Columbia University. So that was a wonderful reconnection to find. But it also turned out when I got to that show that there was one painting of Ollie's, and I thought I'd seen everything that she'd ever made, but there was one painting I'd never seen before. And Bernie explained it was because that painting had been bought the day it came out. So I had just missed it, and it was Night Tent. And look what's happened. I did in fact have to buy something. So my fear was reconciled, but we could talk about Night Tent now or anytime. What do you think?
Well, we're going to start with the slightly earlier piece to give people an opportunity to have a sense of, Allie, this is a larger version of some of the small pieces that you brought in that day. But if you want to talk just a bit about your beginnings, not only with fabric, but also with the circus as a theme, with the full understanding that artists, certainly in the 20th century, have been very engaged by the circus as a theme.
Okay. The circus kind of started, I was still a student at the museum school, and I started doing some silk screen prints with a gradation of color. And then I started I had to do something with that space. So I started doing figures in space, high wire walker. And I did some more pieces along that line. And that kind of got me into doing circus. And eventually it was translated into fabric when I started playing around with it and it needed images. It kind of led from those early silk screens when I was a student in different blends in space into the circus series, which was my first series.
Well, in addition, this is a perfect piece, and it's wonderful to have it on the screen because even all the wrinkles of the fabric come through, at least on my screen. And the fact that you were able, and this is the early ones where you did not use any oil pastel or anything to enhance it, but rather to really reuse ribbon and moire silk and threads, both metallic threads and other threads, to create the illusion of space, of shadows, and of light. And although this is relatively early, it's the 43rd piece that we had in the gallery of your work, those become signature parts of your vocabulary some 45 years later, which is quite wonderful. The next piece is the one that Beth referred to. And there you have the Night Tent. And this is the cloth painting that is over Beth's left shoulder, if I'm correct, with her, has gotten all the way to the UK. But the notion of the light in this piece was then, in the next image, transformed by you into a silkscreen, which is an amazing, amazing example of the serendipity of what the art world is about. Because that particular image, Rose, can you look at the silkscreen? And then we can go back and forth, maybe. Allie, do you want to talk a little bit about the challenge of an opportunity of taking the fabric piece that you had created first and then transforming it and transferring it into a graphic?
I had actually done quite a bit of silk screening when I was a student. mostly monoprints and things. I didn't do much with whole series. That that didn't interest me as much, but so I knew the process. And I worked with a printer who dealt with all the technical things that go wrong. But I did all the separations myself on acetate with like a grease pencil, and you know, there's quite a few layers and you build it up. And so I actually built it up. We would do a proof and then I'd go back and redraw and we'd add colors. And so it was sort of built up the same way, like layer bright colors and then glazing over that and just keep building it up, which is also how I use the fabric. It's quite a bit of similarity in that sense.
Indeed, and I think that's one of the wonderful things that the silkscreen provided you with, was the opportunity to not copy but replicate the process of one layer upon another layer upon another layer. And the magic of the night tent, among other things, in that virtually the entire edition has been sold, was that whenever people come in my office at the gallery, once I'm able to go back again, is that I have a rheostat on the wall and can change the lighting on it, and it's magical. And so that there's no question that when people find your work, it stays with them. And this single image has been part of people's identifying you. And that's an unusual circumstance. And you've done many other silkscreens which are very effective, but this one somehow has appealed to them, both the sense of light, the single figure outside the tent, very enigmatic in a certain sense, and then inside, this person juggling. When you turn the light down, what you succeeded in doing in this, and you've done it in other pieces too, is surround the light by dark. So the dark remains dark and gets darker, and the illusion is that the light gets brighter. And many times people thought I had somebody on the other side of the wall with a light turning it up. Let's talk about space in the next piece, actually the next two pieces, but this is sort of the combination of space, what you talked about before, gradations. Can you speak just a little bit about this wonderful piece? Because there's a sense of enormity in it. Sometimes you limit our vision by containing it within the frame. This one goes on forever.
Well, I really like the big expansive space and the horizon way off in the distance. This one, it all goes in a progression. There's lots of pieces in between. This is basically a parking lot. So I kind of went from the circus tent enclosed to sort of what's happening outside and the flags. And eventually I just moved totally outside. And I was going around looking at parking lots with all the lines and the, you know, whatever they mark things off with. So it's sort of just the continuation, but I expanded it, made it larger, kept the small people, so it makes it look like an endless kind of circus.
But in addition, the fluttering fringes create a sense of movement in a very dramatic way that just the juggler begins to suggest it in that piece. And you really feel like it was yesterday here in Boston, windswept. And last night, where it was 45-mile-an-hour, 50-mile-an-hour winds. And this wonderful sense of movement is then contrasted with the solitary individual vertical figures, creating a kind of, and the one pole that holds everything in place. So there's movement, but there's also a sense of stability that comes in this particular image. The next one is among, I think, my favorite images. It goes back a little bit to the circus in that these are, in quotes, performers, but just talk a little bit about cast shadows. The indication on the side is incorrect. It's not night tent, it's the cast shadows.
Well, this is still, it's part of that same sort of outdoor parking lot, open space, but I broke it up differently. And I just thought the whole idea of these balanced figures, they're almost birds, the ones up in the air. I don't know where it came from. It just sort of grew from the other pieces. And
Well-
it's got station again, which gives a sense of distance and light.
Talk a little bit about the improbability of this scene.
Well,
Maybe
it's-
to talk about improbability, because that's something that I think she thinks about sometimes. How do these people get up there? How do they
Well,
get down?
But
It's
you know
not
what?
a problem.
It's not my problem. They're up there. I have no idea. But weird things happen, and they're up there now. I didn't really think about it. I thought more of this long, linear, vertical kind of post with something at the top and bottom as a shape. And they happen to be figures, but I didn't get into the how possible is it. I just made it up.
I love that. So you should also know that we had this wonderful moment when the original cloth painting was in the gallery and this Russian art critic came in who knew everything, of course. And he turned to his friends to impress them and he says, all wrong. I said, what do you mean all wrong? He says, shadow's not in the right place. At which time I turned to him and said, you know, this is a work of art. It's not a photograph. And what you have done is created this complex pattern of both the vertical and the horizontal in it in such a wonderful way that there's a visual rhythm to it. And it's all somehow solidified by the single, in the cloth painting, just a piece of thread, the horizon line. So what is always important for me with your work is to realize that you just made them. I come to it, or Beth comes to it and sees this as an existential statement about the insecurity of life and the improbability of what life can bring. And what you did was just make a work of art. And then it gets out into the world and I think becomes very enriching to all of us. So for that, I'm indeed very grateful. From here, you moved into an interesting area with the still life pieces. So if we can look at that and go from there. How did you get to still life? Why did you get to still life? You certainly didn't leave your figures behind in this one.
It was gradual. It's still at outdoor space. I spent a lot of time in Mexico, and years later, some of the things that I had seen, especially the ofrendas, which is for Day of the Dead, where they have these complex altars and tables just set out with all kinds of things for that celebration of life. I don't know. I started seeing the table as just another playing with objects as part of the whole environment. And yeah, it was just fun to play with for a while. But there is a progression. It's almost a landscape within a landscape.
Also talk a little bit about the way that you manipulate this very beautiful, very decorated tablecloth to get us to believe that it's actually a horizontal plane on which these objects won't fall off.
Well, it might. Well, it's illusion again. It's like with painting, you put in shadows, light and dark. It is flat, totally two-dimensional. So the shadow and the different levels of darkness give it that illusion that there really are wrinkles. I mean, it's like a painting, except that it's totally flat. I did use a patterned piece of old tablecloth, which had all that pattern on it. But yeah, it really is two-dimensional.
No, I'm aware of that. Brock said the same thing, but you're basically creating a two-dimensional image that gives the illusion of three-dimensionality by using the nettings to stop out, to bunch the fabric at one end or another, so that as I look at it, it looks like a tablecloth on a table, and you make me believe it.
Good.
The next one really does refer very directly to Mexico, and it's one that we sold many years ago. The people passed away, and we just got it back in the gallery to resell it. But if you talk about it, because it's very wonderful to contrast it with the previous one, where you had all the figures and the landscape, and now the window becomes an interesting source, and almost as it parallels the photographs that are on the table.
This, I would say this one is more related to Day of the Dead, which is when they do celebrate those that have passed on. And once near end of October, November, Halloween, they put out all these offerings that person enjoyed in life. If they smoked, there might be a pack of cigarettes, food, wine, photographs, all kinds of things. I'm looking at this, I redid drawings of some of my family in the, it was like an actual drawing in the photographs. And I was just trying to get that sense, an interior sense of containment and remembering. And the outside is like another kind of world. I mean, it's a separate space. But the flags, a light coming in, cast shadows again. I see them really as just landscapes. It just happens to be on top of a table.
And Beth, this is a wonderful piece for you to kind of respond to, because I don't know that you've ever seen it except in the show now.
Well, one of the things I'm thinking, and it's not only because one of the things I'm struck by, particularly because of seeing these pieces one after another, is this recurrent pattern of what's going on inside and what's going on outside, which I'm now realizing is a theme that runs through much of your work. And including what we have yet to see in this show that's coming up in a bit. So I'm very intrigued by the notion that there is so much going on internally, but then there's also a reminder, oh yeah, there is this whole external world as well. And I think if you go all the way back, you can see that in Night Tent. In Night Tent, where you have all the action is inside the tent, where this headless juggler, who I really identified with, is juggling, while outside there's this darkness and this stranger. We don't know who that is it friend or foe? But there is this external, and then there's all this activity inside. But I think I'm seeing this now as a theme that runs right through the course of your work, Howard.
I think also, if we go back to that, and this is a nice opportunity for everyone, at least on my screen, to see just the use of the threads. There are bits of yarn, and when necessary, they're slightly darkened to continue the illusion of shadow and light in that space. The outline of the candle, similarly, of the whatever gourd that's on the table. There's a sense of using this material, and I love always showing your work in the gallery when people come in and say, oh, that's such a beautiful painting. And I'd say, it's not a painting, it's fabric. And they'd walk up to it and they'd just be stunned by the way that you handled the fabric with such finesse, as if, as you said before, it's paint. You've done overlays, and the nettings provided you with the opportunity to create layers without varnish between them in such a meaningful way. Let's look at the next one, because it's really a wonderful opportunity to look at still life, games, exterior, landscape, all at one time. And Ali, for you just to talk about it, I remember, I think that these were games that you thought had, or may well have been played in Mexico centuries ago.
I don't know if they're so much games. This is still Mexico, but some of their playgrounds are they have weird structures, and I just really liked it. I mean, it does look a little like some of their pyramids and things, which I hadn't considered. But it was just this sort of, well, it's like two levels, two different planes. You have your playground or your field, and then I have the table, the corner, which is another kind of surface. I just kind of put the two together.
I got it. No, there's no question you put them together. They're in the same painting.
They are.
The other nice thing is that you've got the resonance between the objects on the table and then the stones that keep moving our eye further into the landscape. So it's almost as if there's a transition from the foreground, where the objects are very delineated, to the stones, and then we're already off and running with your figures in the background. So there's, again, the illusion of both presence and distance And this doesn't have the enclosure, Beth, that the other pieces we were talking about does.
But it has a separation in the sense that there's a lot going on the table. And then there's this whole other story, whatever it is going on. But one of the things I love about this is you have a shadow of the ladder pattern
Right.
on the table.
Yes.
So it gives a sense that whatever's going on here, there's more going on where we can't see it because it's off screen.
Absolutely. And sort of when we were talking about enclosures, we're going to move to the next piece, which is one that I'd like you to talk about, Beth, because it's one you know well.
It is indeed. I live with this one much of the time, except when I'm in England. Well, the story here is, I guess, to some extent connected to the story of Night Tent for me, which is that every once in a while, Ollie, you've done a piece that just speaks right into my soul and makes me feel as if you know what's going on with me and have managed to find a way to visualize it. And I'm more of a word person than an image person, so that's particularly striking to me. But with Night Tent, I was in the middle of a process of beginning to travel back and forth between the US and the UK on consulting assignments that had me going back and forth every other week. And so I was constantly jet lagged, and I did feel as if I was juggling in a night tent, and I did feel headless. This piece I saw shortly after my brother was killed in a whitewater rafting accident, and I felt totally bereft and felt as if my childhood had suddenly ended. And then I saw this piece and I just felt it expressed everything. The dress hanging from the door was my childhood, which was over. The image of an empty rocking chair's shadow just spoke such volumes to me about somebody who was no longer there. And then those two figures way in the background who looked as if they might once have been together, but were now at some distance from each other. The whole thing just flooded me with my feeling of loss. And I then later learned that this was the first piece you had done after your husband died, which was even more moving. And I even later learned that you and I are exactly the same age. So I really felt the connection was powerful. So again, I mean, every once in a while you make something that I just can't live without. Voila.
Holly, that's not a very easy presentation to follow.
Well, it is about loss. There was something about that. It is a child's dress, I found. And it was just, it had a presence. I found it at a flea market and I thought, there's just something here. It was kind of just one of those objects. Yeah, it is sort of like a sense of loss. Like whoever wore the dress is grown up or gone. It's from the past. And the door opens and what's out there. I don't know how I got there. I never know exactly how I get to an image, but I started with the dress because it just affected me. And then I thought, what do I do with it? How do I use it? And open door, another inside, outside kind of space.
The other glorious part to me, actually, beside the shadow of the rocking chair at the bottom, is the shadow of a window.
I agree.
And so there is the one down below is a solid shadow. The other is the light defined by the shadow. And so there is a kind of openness. There's a melancholy sense to it without any personal response to it, but just looking at it. And then again, using the boulders, the stones, the movement of the landscape into this distant sky. And one of the wonderful things has always been in the gallery, when people come to the work, they come with their own stories. And this particular piece, which has also been made into a silkscreen, carries that opportunity for everyone to somehow move into the space on their own terms, but you've invited them. On to the next one. This is just kind of splendid. The title is one of Ali's poetic titles, A Special Place, but separate from the poetry of it, the piece itself is alive with energy of light. Ali, it's more you should talk about it, but for my point of view of experiencing, again, an illusory space that I want to be part of, using the patterning of a Vermeer floor, except this time it's rich with color. Everything, this is like fireworks in a very special way. But you have to talk about it, not me.
I do. Well,
Not
it's Mexico again, up to a point. There's something about that place that always got through to me. And it's sort of a combination. The wallpaper isn't so much Mexico, but I wanted pattern. I just wanted this kind of vibrant space. And once in a while you see places like this with that kind of shadow. I think I had a photograph of something where the shadows were cast from maybe a grape arbor, but inside were all these great strips of light. And I wanted to put that in. And then the floor was, okay, I'll do a checkered floor to offset the rest of it. And it's inside, outside again. You're right about that kind of contrast.
In addition, you also have the linear quality of the interior, the walls, the spaces, the definition of it, even the shadow. But then you have the organic sense of the trees and the palms. You have a lot of additional movement beside the light in the interior to make this continually alive. And you feel like, depending on where it's hung, that you could literally walk into that space and walk through that door and be out into this open area. And that's a gift for everyone. My recollection is that for a long period of time, you weren't a big fan of flying anywhere. And so you and Jack would drive from here all the way to Oaxaca in Mexico. And then eventually when years later you were invited to go to Venice in Italy, it was clear that you couldn't drive there. And so the next piece will get us there in a very different way and talk about both having decided to finally take the invitation and go, but also what the carnival, how it resonated with you.
It was actually a friend from Florida moved over there and invited all his friends to come visit. And, you know, it was either the Biennale or Carnival. And I chose this time to go. And it was amazing. The whole city was, it wasn't Disneyland. I mean, it was quite quiet. There were not mobs of people. And a lot of the people that lived there, they would have these ornate, beautiful costumes and just stand around and kind of walk through the city. I mean, it was just the most amazing place anyway. And then to be there for that was pretty memorable. I was only like a week and a half. I could spend more time, but I took photos of some of the people and, you know, made changes. I think the whole series basically is almost black and white or pretty monochromatic, the pieces that came from that series. But it was great.
But there's also this kind of sparkle and liveliness that you've introduced into it, which doesn't appear too often in the work, but when it does, it certainly has an impact and a meaning. And this is a really small piece, but it still has this sense. And no matter when we've been to Venice, which isn't that often, we were there a couple of years ago, there is a sense of magic. It seems like such an unreal place that to be there for Carnival sort of heightens that experience of unreality. And it's perfect for you with the sense of the Colosseum or the building behind. There's all the sense of mystery that comes into this work, and then the stunning contrast of light and dark. So now that you're able to travel by plane, we can then go to other places. And this is one of just a delightful, delightful piece that introduces us as your companions on your journey to the sense of the Grand Canyon of open space. And do you want to talk a little bit about Nikki juggling, and then we'll look at a couple of other pieces.
Well, a couple of my neighbors had gone on a rafting trip in the Grand Canyon, and they kept saying, that's something you have to do. So a friend called up and said, I'm going on this trip before I go back to school. There's space in the group. Do you want to go? And of course I said yes. And it turned out to be the most amazing trip. And this was this little kid with his parents, and he had juggling balls. And he was kind of bored at night. Everybody's sitting around the camp, and he'd go over and start playing with the juggling. So I started with that. And then that was the first one. And it was still related to the circus because I didn't know what else to do. Then I started really looking at the photos and the whole experience. And I started that whole series of all the cliffs and the rocks and the water. And it really started with just this child standing on the edge of the Colorado River. It was just a great trip. And a couple of the people that were running it had invited a lot of their friends from Breckenridge. So it was a real young group, and they wanted to show them everything. So we'd take hikes way up the side of the cliff. We did a lot. It was pretty outstanding. So that was the first one. And then I got involved with the waterfalls that you don't expect to see, and some of the trails. And I went back for a second trip a few years later, pretty much the same part of the river.
And the next one, please, Rose. So either of you can speak about it. It's really it's a pretty major piece. It's 5 feet high.
Well, it is indeed, and it lives in my home in Cambridge, and I have had a number of people who have tried to buy it right off my wall. Because I go back and forth and periodically find myself back living in the UK again, I have from time to time rented out my house. And I think every single tenant who's lived there has tried to buy this. But the person who's most worth mentioning is that I actually, without knowing at the time that this was going to happen, my house got rented out at one point to William Kentridge, who Bernie may be able to say more than I can about this. He's a pretty well-known artist. Yeah. And and I have a number of pretty wonderful pieces, many of them from Pucker Gallery in this home in Cambridge. But he was particularly taken with your work, Ollie. He just said he'd never seen anything like this before. It was really original. And, as Bernie was saying at the beginning of this talk. But this piece, I think it has a spiritual quality to it. I mean, you've used your little figure again to help create that sense of the hugeness of the Grand Canyon. But this is it's such a centering piece. And I mean, my Christian friends comment that there is a cross in it, but I think, I just think it goes even deeper than that. I just think it's profound, and you can really feel the water and you can feel the rocks. And every time I sit and look at it, it just centers me. I love it.
He was here to give the lectures at Harvard, I believe. And so
yes, Radner Lectures, that's right, yeah.
So it was really quite an extraordinary thing. He's an amazing, amazing artist. So it's not a bad tribute to have him drawn to it, Allie. But there are other ones that easier for you to talk with. This is the one that I enjoy an enormous amount because it combined your willingness to create a piece for the Longwood Symphony here when they handed you the wooden frame of a violin. And then typical of you, you put it in the context of where you were in your own work. And at that point, it was the canyons and the cliffs around it, but you also gave us the opportunity to have a waterfall with it. Do you want to talk just a bit about the piece itself? It's in a box, actually, which is somewhat hard to visualize, but the box is maybe 3 inches deep. So it's like show and tell.
It actually was, it was fun to do it. I had mostly just done 2-dimensional, and having the 3D and this beautiful violin, which is this great shape, and I couldn't decide what to do with it. It just made a kind of sense to me to actually take the strings. We had unfinished violins. I mean, we could do anything pretty much with them. I did not destroy a beautiful instrument. So I had the opportunity to kind of manipulate everything. And I went on, I did, I think, another 3 pieces using violins. It was just, yeah, old friend. I hadn't seen it for a while.
Well, it's also nice. It's sort of hard to tell from this, but you also pasted musical sheets on the border and on the sides of it. So it's certainly a musical canyon, if you will. The next one is just the music of the waterfall and the richness of the textures, and then the loveliness of the light coming through. Actually, today it's pretty close. The blue sky in Boston's finally back a little bit. But again, your willingness to commit to spaces and places that take all of us there. It's what I think about when I read many books. I'm grateful to the authors because they take me to experiences and places I've never been. This is certainly one I've never been to, but you certainly captured in such a beautiful way.
The thing I love about this, and also the one before it, is there's something about the rocks that become personified. And I really see this as 2 rocks kissing each other. And I also just love that shade of blue.
I think we'll leave it at that, because I do want to spend some of the time as to where we are with the exhibit that's up, which I love the title since it was my idea, called Under Wraps. But it was just this notion that you integrated again. First of all, you astonished again when you began these jackets. And then this opportunity came. So Beth, if you talk a little about the background of it, and then Ali, a little about the piece. And we've got also, this is the finished piece. We've got some in-process pieces that we'll look at as the 2 of you talk.
Well, yes, I mean, this is, I had been admiring Ali's jackets for a couple of years, and then I had this moment of aha, because the jacket that you see here was originally a wedding kimono that a very close Japanese friend of my mother's from college gave to my mother as a wedding present. And the 2 girls had met at Vassar. Very unusually in that generation, Kazuko, my mother's friend, the daughter was sent to get an education in the US. And they met and bonded, became very close, and then the war broke out. And well, this is World War II, and they were of course separated, but they managed to recontact each other afterwards and stayed lifelong friends. And when my mother got married, Kazuko gave her this gift, which my mother then cut down in order to be able to wear it as an evening jacket, because she had no occasion for a kimono, and she wore it to special occasions, to the White House, for example. Eventually I inherited it, and I wore it a couple of times, but then it became so fragile, I just put it away. And you know, what a waste to have something like this just put away. And then I saw Ali's jackets, and I had this idea. So I asked Ali if she would make a painting out of it.
Ali, do you want to talk a little bit about that? First of all, it stayed with you for a while.
It stayed with me, what, 2 years?
Right.
It took a while to figure it out, and I didn't want to cut it, which I have to do. And it already had all the symbolism for Beth, and I was like, what am I going to do? So I put it up on the wall for a while. I took it down. I took it back to Boston, brought it back down, and I had been thinking, because I have the book you wrote about your father, there were photos, and I was thinking maybe I can incorporate maybe part of a photograph, not the photograph, but maybe just an outline or something. And I don't know. I just kept thinking about it. I did the last piece with the clown, and there's a shadow in the inside, which is what I was going to do with this piece, and it didn't make sense. So, and all the front, all the birds, the parts of the bird were just little sections, but on the back, I pieced it, but I was able to get the entire image of the crane. So I cut the back off, of course, and I moved it to the front and started from there and kept working that way. But I was nervous because it had already had so many connotations for you that I thought, what am I gonna do? I have to cut it up.
I'm so sorry to have put you under pressure.
No,
You did such a magnificent job with it. And I think one of the things I love is that the Japanese tradition is beautiful, but very constrained. And so there's something about the fact that you took this red-crowned crane, which is an emblem in Japan, and released it. You cut it loose, literally, it cut loose, which is just wonderful. It's, you know, because that's so Western. I mean, the combination is just such a wonderful message.
I think that the title, The Gift of the Tancho is the crane, and it's a symbol of 1,000 years of life. So it is longevity for sure, but not only in a physical sense, but I think in a memory sense and an emotional sense, psychological sense, that it endures. And which the other notion of using the bamboo, which is so present throughout all of Japan, and so many aspects of Japanese life are supported or use bamboo in such a reverential way, to have it all going on. And then all the things that you've done up until now, the use of light, of shadow, of dark, of light, all that comes into play and makes this piece extraordinarily wonderful, with the mysterious opening in the very center of it. So these are rare moments, I think, that the gallery sometimes is happy to be part of, which is the coming together of sort of willing partners. And then to really capture what Thomas says often, that memory is more permanent than matter. But in this case, we have the matter as well. I'd like to look at some of the jacket pieces, because this, in a sense, as Beth said, began to get her thinking about the use of jackets. And just to go with you, Ali, through a couple of them, this one in particular, and it's nice to have some of the in process alongside the completed piece.
well, I started the jackets, one of the first ones, I think, had the rows. I was just thinking, again, like a tent, inside, outside. Eventually it evolved, and it's still going, a whole series. And I buy most of these things in thrift shops. I go through the jacket section. At first it was just plain dark, the suit coat, this formal thing. And then I started finding these other jackets, mostly women's jackets. And sometimes they suggest what it might be. For me, this was water and light, and a lot of them with the images, the patterns, I buy them because they sort of interest me, and I think maybe I'll do something with it. And this was the later one, but yeah, I have now quite a pile of jackets. Thrift shop, I support a lot of different organizations here that have thrift shops.
You've been a good fan of theirs. Let's look at the next one, because it gives us an opportunity to, I think, also acknowledge and remember Jack in such an important way. It's just a wonderful piece that combines the carnation, the falling away of the petals of it, the textures in the background, which are certainly reminiscent of the way the Jack worked in many of the pieces. There's some examples now, I think, Rose, aren't there, of Jack's work as well. So these, Ali, can you best describe this?
Well, this is Jack's last series. He worked with basic building materials like tin and tacks, and this actually is 3 panels that are hinged. The side two will bend. It's more like a screen. It's on the wall. But this series was a lot of it based on Mexico with the pyramids and you know, just those architectural ruins and things. And it was all tacked down and very tactile. And yeah, it was metal, had nice surface. That's on the left is a detail. The one on the right is another painting. Some of the shapes, I mean, we went back and forth. There's similarities between both our things, even though it's very different. Some of his shapes, some of the way he set things up. So that silver one, the jacket is quite metallic looking. I was thinking it's metal and do something with it. And then I started thinking rivets, and it came directly from some of Jack's pieces. The idea of sort of making these cutouts in the metal and you know, nailed down, and except I changed it, but that's where that came from.
And then the next one shows you the jacket and then the finished one. This was the jacket, I guess, with the tag from when you bought it.
First shop, whichever one that was.
But
I
the
can't
other-
wearing it, but it was perfect for what I wanted.
And then to go back a little bit to the image itself, which in addition to everything else, it's fine there, with both the carnation with the petals falling off, the unease of the water, the turbulence that was there, and then in the midst of the turbulence, the Statue of Liberty. To the best of my recollection over the 30, 40 plus years, the political scene around us, all of us, never really seemed to be part of your agenda. And then suddenly the mistreatment of people who wanted to come to this country on an ongoing basis over the past 4 years until recently certainly got your attention. And,
Well, and made it central.
right, yeah, do it. And so Rose, do you have the poem? Or just the last part of the Emma Lazarus poem, The New Colossus, just to read the last portion of it? If you, there you go.
Yeah,
You're good.
I fear that my mic isn't terribly great, but
You're good.
the end of the poem reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door."
Thank you. And that image appears in maybe 3 or 4 of the pieces that are in the present exhibition. And again, it fits because that's where you were at that point, Ali, and that's where many of us are still trying to figure out how this will be resolved in some way that's humane, and recognizes other people's humanity and their opportunity to be part of this country. The next one I'd like to look at, if we can, which is, I think, the most recent one. But this is more process of the piece itself. Rose, let's look at the finished one. Yeah, that's great. And just for a minute, just to sort of absorb not only the title of the curtain call, you have used the masks and other pieces we didn't show. Clearly, again, the flower with the petals descending. Rarely, however, have you used the proscenium with the curtains on either side in such a wonderful way. And now let's go back and look at process and ask Ali to talk a little about it.
Well, back to the jacket. It's a very plain one. As I mentioned, the one I did for Beth, I had considered having this like a profile, maybe a cast shadow profile, that I was thinking about the crane piece. So I had the mask kicking around. I thought, well, maybe I'll do something with the mask. And that's actually a mask. It's a paper mache mask. I have a few of them. And I was just pinning it up, see what would happen. And I kept moving it around. Eventually, I put it on the left and did the whole stage set and had the cast shadow, the profile within that inner space. So I used the idea that I was kind of saving for the next one, and I used it for this one.
It's wonderful.
How I pin everything. I put it up, I take it down, I move it, I try something else, I put it back up, I repin, and eventually something comes out of it. They're all that have appeared in other paintings. I've used the mask before, I've used curtains before. It's just sort of rearranging the objects.
Well, the way it gets done is because you have a deadline, like a catalog that needs it. So that's the truth, rather than
That helps.
It does indeed. We're just going to look briefly at a number of images in your studio as the work that you're now working on is in process. So if you want to talk just a bit about it, separate from the sleeping dog, we'll let them lie.
All of the material is surrounding me, but you don't see that part. The dog is always where I'm going to stand. She picks the spot so I can fall over her. I work on the wall, pin it up, so it's always, I sew it when it's up too. I'd never lay it flat. I can see what I'm doing. And I can just move everything. I have pins. The back is like insulation, really. I painted it white. It's that foam insulation, so it's a big bulletin board. And I can just move things around, and it goes on and on and on. I keep moving stuff, ripping it off, putting it back, maybe sewing it down, maybe ripping it off again. More of the fabrics. It's all kind of sorted according to texture, color. I have one bin that's transparent, sheer blends, one earth tones, one rocks, one water, green water, brown water, flat colors.
Fantastic. And so this is this the piece that is presently
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Behind me as I talk. I was trying all kinds of inside maneuvers to see what I was going to do. The jacket has a lot of sparkle in it, and I was thinking a night scene, and it might eventually it'll have I think maybe some more constellations or something, but I went through a lot of different versions on this.
It looks to be that, yeah, there you go again.
Through it.
But I think I mentioned this some time ago when we were talking, which is that a number of artists have said that any really important artist has one good idea and sometimes two. And in this case, your good idea, I think, was to, one, find fabric as your way of speaking, meaning pieces and textures and overlays. But essentially, the core of who you are is the journey that you've taken us all on. And that really is the search for the image that you want to share with people as a reflection of your inner self. And you don't need to talk about that because your art talks about it in such a meaningful and profound way. For me, and we'll end with the last, which I love, the curtain call piece, really, I think, speaks so wonderfully to all of us. As time passes, we have the opportunity still, if we're around, to reflect. Your work allows that with no agenda. I think it's a real gift to all of us to realize that, in quotes, under wraps is the opportunity for all of us to find ourselves and to continue to be part of the process as you lead us inadvertently, because I know it's not part of your intention, to really allow that to happen. So it's an enormous pleasure just to be together with you, with Beth. Also to recognize once again, and I should, that Chris Rifkin and Anita Clausen and Beth are the three fates or muses that have been so devoted to your work. And I think for exactly what Beth said before, that somehow your work intersects with people's lives at moments that you don't know about, but it stays with them and it enriches their lives. So just thank you so much. Rose, you want to announce who wrote an amazing story, which we'll post, and the image that inspired it? And just say to everyone, thank you.
I would love to. So based off of this work by Clift, and it's currently in our exhibition. I'm looking at it right now, as you guys can see on your screen. I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who participated, but the winner of this contest is Anne Hannum. So thank you for your beautiful story, and then on to the next.
And we'll post the story, which is not an interpretation of the painting, but inspired the story, which is in a way, I wouldn't say a proof, but at least partial proof of what I was trying to say, Ali, that your work inspires other people to be who they are. So thank you, Beth. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Rose. And thank you, everyone, for listening.